Hey guys, welcome back to Builds by Maz. Today I'll be showing you how to install luxury vinyl plank flooring, commonly known as LVP. We got this from Flooret, and I'll walk you through the full installation process so you can get your own transformation just like this. This is a great option for DIYers. Everything attaches easily, there's no gluing required, and you can cut the planks to size with just a razor blade. Plus, it's waterproof, durable, and scratch resistant, not to mention great on a budget. Because Flooret is a direct-to-consumer brand, you can get really high quality flooring for an affordable price. And this LVP you're seeing here costs less than $3 per square foot. And if you want to save even more money by removing your old flooring and installing this yourself, then you've come to the right place. Let's get started. We started off by ordering a bunch of samples to decide what kind of color and style we wanted. I put a link in the description, and if you use code MAXFLORET, you can get 50% off your own sample order. They've got tons of great options, and here you can see the difference between a couple styles. On the left is the base, and on the right is their signature series, which is a thicker plank. Either way, the samples are really good sized. We explored some options from big box stores, and you can see how much smaller those samples are. The Flooret samples really give you a better idea of how it's going to look in your house. I recommend getting a variety of samples so you can see them all in person and narrow it down until you have your favorite 2 or 3. Then it's a good idea to move these throughout your house so you can see how they look with different lighting, furniture, or wall colors. We ended up choosing this color, which is called Neon. This is a really great neutral option, and we went with the base series. Each plank is 6 by 48 inches, 5 millimeters thick, and has a 20 mil wear layer, which was one of the key selling points for us. The 5 millimeter thickness is referring to how thick the actual plank is from top to bottom. The wear layer is an invisible layer on top which protects the board from daily wear and safeguards it from scratches, scuffs, or spills. Wear layers are regularly measured in mils, so you can easily compare the thicknesses across brands. A mil is 1/1000th of an inch, and here I'm showing 1/8 of an inch, which is as thick as 125 mils. Most LVP options will offer wear layers that are between 6 and 12 mils thick. Flooret's thinnest option has 20 mils, which is huge especially if you've got pets or kids, because these floors can really take a beating and not show any damage. Our cats all have claws, and we don't have to worry about them scratching up the flooring. Here are some specifics on Flooret's 3 lines. The Signature and Craftsman are thicker with 40 mil wear layers, while the base is their most affordable option. Once we received our order, we could begin unboxing everything, and the full-size planks looks really good. Not only does this look just like hardwood, but the pattern actually has a texture to it, and you can actually feel all the different grooves. Each board also has a thin black underlayment pre-attached to the bottom. This will provide some cushion and protection and help with sound dampening. Before you can begin installation, you'll need to remove everything out of the room. If you're doing multiple areas, you'll need to pick a starting place that makes sense. Usually, you'll want to start from one side of the house and work towards the other. With everything out of the way, we could begin pulling up this old carpet. Starting from a corner, you shouldn't have any problems pulling it up using some pliers. I also recommend you cut the carpet into sections using a utility knife. This will help make it easy to roll it up and haul it away. I like using a few strips of duct tape on the ends of the rolls to make sure that they don't come unraveled. Make sure to also remove any vent covers you have on the floor. With all the carpet out of the way, you can then proceed to removing the carpet padding. Most likely, it'll be stapled or glued down to the subfloor, but you should be able to pull most of it up without too much difficulty. Just like with the carpet, you can cut the padding into strips and roll everything up. The really annoying part is removing all these staples left behind. There's really no way around this. You'll have to just take some pliers and remove them all one by one. I've also previously posted a video where my subfloor was concrete and my carpet padding was glued down. If you want to find instructions for that kind of setup, you can click on the video in the top right or find the link in the description. But with all the staples removed, we could then move on to removing this carpet tack strip, which is held in place to the subfloor by these nails. Using a crowbar, You can wedge it under the strip at the nail location and pry it up. Just repeat this process all along the perimeter of the room and you'll have the whole strip pulled up in no time. We also had this section of linoleum that was held in place by these metal strips, but I pried it up in a similar fashion using my hammer. It looks like this used to be glued down, but luckily it was so old, the glue wasn't even attached anymore, which made it easier to remove. This is also the time when you want to check for any low or high spots in your subfloor, and ensure that the transition between boards is flat along the seams. If you do need to fill any low spots, you can use this patch and level kit, which I also covered in my previous video. Luckily, this subfloor was really flat, so I just need to clean up all the dust and dirt, giving it all a good vacuuming. Finally, all the prep work was done, and we had a clean surface to begin our installation on. One of the decisions you'll need to make is which direction you want your planks to run. The most common option is to run your flooring parallel with your longest wall. Since we have this long space extending from our hallway all the way through the kitchen, we're going to run our boards in this direction. When you're planning how to lay out your flooring, you want to pull planks from at least 3 boxes at a time. That way you have a wider variety of patterns to choose from. You want to organize your planks by their repeating designs, so you want to look out for similarities. For example, these two both have this same knot pattern. By organizing them now, you won't accidentally put them next to each other when you're laying down your flooring. Here's another repeating pattern, which again, I'll keep these two apart when laying the flooring. After laying these all out, I was really impressed by the low amount of repetitions. This is another area where I think Flooret stands out, because some other LVP manufacturers only provide 6 or 8 unique patterns, so you get a lot of repeating designs. But that wasn't the case here, and I had a ton of options to choose from. You'll also want some kind of flooring installation kit. I like this one from LifeProof. It has everything you need: a mallet, tapping block, pull bar, and a bunch of spacers. Installing this LVP is actually a really simple process, and it just clicks together with a tongue and groove system. You can see this groove all along the edge has a space for the next board to fit into it. You just put it in at an angle and lay it down, and these two boards will lock together. The same concept applies when laying boards end to end in the same row. They latch together easily, and it's a really secure connection. The included spacers have 2 different widths depending on your needs. One side is 1/4 inch, while the other side is 1/2 inch. For this LVP, you're going to want to make sure you use the 1/4 inch side. Before beginning, you'll need to measure the width of your room and divide it by the width of each individual plank. That way you can ensure that you don't end up with a very small row at the end that's super skinny, like this situation here. To prevent this, what you need to do is trim down your first row so every other row shifts down, leaving a few more inches for the final row. My room worked out where I could start with a full-size plank. But regardless, with the first row, you need to make sure this groove side is facing outwards towards the room. Starting in the left-hand corner, make sure you put your spacers along the top and side edges to allow for expansion with temperature changes. You can then click the next board into place just to the right of it, making sure to use your 1/4 inch spacers. With this first row, it's extremely important to line up the ends exactly, because these will act as a guide for the rest of the room. Once you get to the end of the row, you want to make sure you have enough room for at least a 6 to 8 inch piece. What you don't want is to be stuck with a little sliver at the end. If that's how your room lines up, you'll need to go back to the beginning and cut off a portion of the first board, shifting everything to the left so that you have more space for a longer board on the end. I had a good 10 inches here, so I didn't need to do that. Now when cutting your board to size, you can't just line it up and cut off the end, because you need this tongue piece, which is on the left side. So it's actually the first part of this board which is going to be cut and fit into this section here. Flip the board over so the groove side is facing away from you, and use your spacer against the wall before lining up your cut. You'll need a good quality utility knife, and you'll probably go through a few blades throughout the course of this project. Score the LVP 3 or 4 times, making sure you're using a speed square or other straight edge to maintain a straight line. Then you can just snap the board in 2. This is one of the best parts about installing LVP, because cutting these boards is so easy. If you measure carefully, this piece should fit right into place, with just enough room for a spacer on the end. We can now use that same board we just cut putting the cut end against the wall to start the next row. Insert the long edge into the first row and then lay it flat, using the tapping block all along the edge until you have a tight and secure fit. Then tap the board from the end until it's touching your wall spacer. You'll know you've done this correctly if you don't see any gaps or visible seams. You also want to make sure the board ends at least 8 inches away from the previous row's end joint. You don't want to end up having two joints right next to each other like this. We'll install the next board in the row by again connecting the long edge and tapping it into place. You'll be left with a little gap between the board ends, just like this. The way to close it off is to first use a scrap piece of the LVP, and I actually use one of my sample pieces. You can then connect it along the long edge to create a type of bridge between these two to make sure they stay on the same plane. You'll then tap the board from the right edge until it's fully in place. If you look closely, you can see when I first stopped here, there's still a little visible seam. So I kept on tapping away until it closed off and these two pieces were seamless. One important note on the tapping block. Each side isn't the same. One edge has this squared off piece, while the other side has kind of a stair-step look. That's the side you're going to want to use with this LVP, because it fits right over the groove on each plank, so when you're tapping it, it prevents the grooved edge from getting damaged. Here's another thing you may come across. Sometimes when you're attaching the long edge of a board together, it may not lay flat on its own at first. You can see here how this front edge is off the ground. But that's no problem, you just need to tap it into place, and once it's fully locked in, it'll lay flat. I'm glad I was taking my time and doing this all properly, because I got a surprise visit from all 3 job site safety inspectors. But here I'll go over how to finish a row one more time. Make sure your board's flipped around from the usual direction and that you're putting a spacer against the wall. Then line up your straight edge with the end of the piece before it and score the LVP 3 or 4 times in a straight line. Then you can just snap the LVP in two. Here you see the underlayment didn't come all the way off, but I just scored it along the back and could pull it apart. Here's where the pull bar will come into play. Since we have the wall along the edge here, you'll have to use the pull bar into the little gap and hammer along the other side to push the board into place. Here's a more close-up view showing exactly how you should use this tool. Starting the third row, you need to pay attention not only to where the end joints are for the row before it, but also the row before that. This will ensure that you're not accidentally laying H patterns like this, which is the way bricks are normally laid. With LVP flooring, you want the seams to all be random. Starting the fourth row, if I use this piece that I was left with from the previous cut, I would start to get this staircase pattern, where the end joint on each row is about the same distance from the one above it. This is also something you want to avoid. So to fix that, you could use a longer starting piece here, or what I'm doing is cutting this piece to be shorter, which will help to mix up the pattern. After the first few rows, you'll start to get the hang of things and you can move along more quickly. The biggest thing to pay attention to is just to make sure that you're not making repeating patterns, either with the end joints or with the patterns on the actual planks. And on that note, every few rows, make sure you're opening up a new box or two, so you always have a wide variety of patterns to choose from. The next challenge was laying the flooring around this vent, since the full board would cover it up. First, I trimmed the board to be the correct length as if there wasn't a vent. Now in this case, the area I needed to trim was so close to the edge that I didn't have enough leverage to snap it, so I had to turn to my miter saw to make this cut. After confirming the board was the correct length, I then measured out the area that I needed to trim off to leave room for this vent opening. I transferred all my measurements to the LVP surface and marked off the area that needed to be cut. A jigsaw is definitely the best tool for this, and I'm going to be using this downcut blade made for laminate. I just followed along the lines I drew and cut out the section that needed to be removed. I installed it in place around the vent and everything fit great. I did a similar process with the next couple of rows, cutting around the vent. This next row I just had to cut short, and for the row after that, I needed to make another little cutout. You can always line up the piece with your cutout drawn to make sure you've marked off the right section. After getting this last piece in place, I did a test fit with the vent cover to make sure it still fit and that it covered up all the cut edges. As you progress through the room, you might start to run out of wall spacers, but you can always go back and just reuse some of the old ones, since there's no reason to keep them on every finished row. My wife and I took turns laying down rows, and we were able to pretty quickly get through the rest of this room. This brought us to the end row, which wasn't wide enough to fit full-size planks. Just like with the end pieces of each row, you'll need to flip the board around and put your spacers into place. But this time, instead of cutting a length off the board, we're going to actually cut through the width. I like using a table saw for these long cuts down the middle, but if you don't have one, you can score and snap it like we've been doing. With our piece cut to the correct width, you can set it into place and then use the pull bar to attach it securely to the penultimate row. If you have a piece like this that only needs a partial cut down the middle, you'll need to measure out and mark where that cut will end. I then slowly ran the board through my table saw, making sure to stop it right on my mark. You can then use a jigsaw to make the perpendicular cut. I then attached this board into place, again using my pull bar, and it fit really snugly. I could then finish out the rest of the room just like normal. With the room fully completed, I went ahead and removed the remaining spacers. This is also a really good time to go ahead and install your baseboards, since you've already got all the furniture out of the room. I'll be posting a full instructional on this process, and it'll cover everything you need to know to install baseboards, as well as how to finish the seams properly with caulking to get a truly finished look just like this. I'll also cover the steps for installing baseboards around rounded corners, which can be a little bit tricky. But focusing back on the flooring, it was time to move on past the living room and into the hallway. I trimmed out another section of carpet and also cut along the bedroom doorway openings. Then I could pull everything out and roll it up just like before. Of course, I also had to remove this set of carpet tack strips. I then had to deal with this unexpected large gap in the subfloor. The normal spacing between subfloor boards is about 1/8 of an inch, and this is way bigger than that. Lucky for me, the way these boards lined up, this gap was kind of in the middle of the next row, and I didn't feel like there was going to be any issue with putting the boards right over it. If the gap had been on a seam between the LVP planks, I probably would have needed to fill it, but as it was, I just installed these just like normal. The next tricky part about installation is when you have to go through door frames and deal with door trim. Usually, you're going to want to install your LVP underneath this door trim, so you can use a flush cut saw like this, or if you have one, use a multi-tool to cut through the bottom of the door trim. Use a scrap piece of your flooring, line it up against the trim, and cut out a little notch. This will ensure that your cutout is exactly the same height as your flooring, so you can slide it underneath the trim and there will be no visible gap. I needed to cut out kind of a U-shaped piece here to get around this wall, so I did all my measurements and then cut it out with a jigsaw. Once I tapped it into place and saw that I had a good fit, I did the same thing on this other edge here. Once that was done, I could continue with the next row of the hallway. This left side of the hallway was a little unusual because it was recessed, so I actually had to cut out a partial row and install it first before doing the rest. Otherwise, I wouldn't have anything to attach the next row to. I also wanted to show that any pencil marks you make are completely erasable, so it's okay to make your measurements on the top surface. With that partial sized row filling in the recess, I could then complete the second row that I had already started, and from there, I could do the next few rows just like normal, starting from the very left and working to the right. I was able to knock out a lot of this hallway really quickly, and all of this probably took me about an hour. This part of the wall wasn't perfectly straight, and I had a gap that was kind of going at an angle. You may run into a similar problem like this where you don't have room for more flooring, and I like to keep some spare baseboard with me so I can see if it's going to be covered up. You can see that the right side was fine, but this left edge may show a little bit of a gap. One trick I came up with was to just use a little piece of cardboard along the bottom edge of where the baseboard is going to go. Then when you press it against the wall, you'll have a little bit more coverage, and in my case here, it was just enough to cover up the flooring. To deal with walls that aren't at 90-degree angles, I recommend using an angle finder like this. It makes things super easy, and I'll put a link to this in the description, but there are also some cheap ones for like $5. All you've got to do is press this against the corner, tighten up the dial, and it'll show you what the angle is. You don't even need to do any math. You can just measure out where the angle needs to start, and then use this tool as a straight edge when cutting your LVP with your razor blade. This will give you a nice clean cut that will perfectly match your wall's angle. When coming along this doorway, I again use the tool, setting the correct angle, and then using it as my straight edge when making my cuts. You may also end up having to make some unusual cuts in your LVP, and a contour gauge can help you with that process. This cut alone took me like 20 minutes to make because there was so much measuring involved. But I could use my gauge to trace the pattern onto the LVP and use a jigsaw to cut it out. Continuing on to the next section of the house, we had to do all the same prep work, but this time there were also a few sections that had existing baseboard. You'll want to use a pry bar to help pull these out. I trimmed off the top of the caulking and then hammered the pry bar into place, and it came out pretty easily. This is just a small pry bar I had on hand, but they do make good quality metal ones specifically for this purpose. I also cut up this old section of linoleum and scraped off any bits that were still glued down. Since it was more manageable for us to lay the LVP room by room, we ended these rows in a stagger instead of continuing all the way through the kitchen. Doing this stagger is important as it allows us to continue the rows from top to bottom when we're ready. I had another floor vent to work around here, but after making that cutout, this dining room was really straightforward, and I made progress super quickly. When you're working on the rows near a wall, you won't always have room for a full piece to use as a bridge. I like to use a little cutout that still has this tongue attached, and you can use that as your miniature bridge, which will help keep the boards aligned as you tap them end to end. Of course, on the last row, you won't have any room for a bridge at all, and here I just use my foot to keep the ends at the same height while I tap the board into place. I started installing some more baseboards, and we also swapped out our old vent covers to match the elevated look of the Flooret LVP. I also want to mention that this flooring is totally waterproof, and even pouring water along the seam where these three boards meet, nothing seeps through. As long as you've done your installation correctly, the water will sit on top and evaporate long before it can do any potential damage. Because of that, we could put Flooret's LVP in our kitchen without having to worry about spilling liquids on it. Getting in behind the fridge, I removed the baseboards and found that there was a little bit of surface mold. With the mask on, I scraped all the mold off and then used this Zep mold and mildew stain remover as an added precaution to make sure I didn't miss anything. Then I could pull up this old flooring and work my way across the kitchen before moving into the recessed area where the fridge goes. When hammering this board into place, I had to keep my weight on the board before it so that it remained sturdy and didn't shift around. I continued this method for the rest of the boards, always keeping my weight on the row before it because I wasn't tapping into a wall. After getting this area finished, I rolled the fridge back into place so that it was out of the way. When going around this wall, I could only attach this small section of the plank to the end, which didn't give me very much security. To mitigate this, I next installed a plank from the previous row, which would help connect these on their long edge. I then continued these two rows all the way to the end of the wall. Now that I had some more stability, I could continue on to this back area without worrying about the rows falling out of alignment. With this area complete, I could move over my furniture and continue on to the second half of the kitchen. Installing new flooring throughout your house might seem like an overwhelming task, but if you break it up into sections, it really becomes quite manageable. This section here was right at 45 degrees, which made things convenient because I could just cut the boards with the long edge of my speed square. If you'll be moving your oven or other heavy objects out of the way, I recommend using some furniture pads or some small pieces of cardboard underneath the legs. This will help it to slide without causing any damage to the new flooring. I'm not going to remove my dishwasher because that's just too much of a hassle, but I am going to remove this kick plate down below, which is just attached with a couple of screws. This is pretty common on most dishwashers, so you can probably do the same thing. I traced out a couple of planks and cut them to size like this, and I got them to fit as exactly as I could underneath this space. This can definitely get a little tricky because you don't have much space to work with down there, but after reinstalling the kick plate, I was really happy with how this turned out, and this is a much better option in my opinion than removing the whole dishwasher. I finished out this oven area and then slid it back into place, and using those pieces of cardboard really helps. After days of working on this, I was finally down to this last section, and it felt so great to finally get this last piece hammered into place. After installing baseboards, the last step is to work on the transition pieces. The first piece I'll go over is called T-molding, and the reason it's called that is because when you look at it from the side, it's kind of in the shape of a letter T. There are two parts to this. First you have the track which connects to the subfloor, and then you attach the top piece which has grooves that snap into place, holding it down. T-molding is most often used in doorways or anytime you're transitioning to a new surface like carpet. It just has to be the same height as the LVP. You want to measure and cut to size, and then fit your track into place. You can attach it to the subfloor with construction adhesive or screws down the middle. I'm about to get new carpet, so I'm not going to be installing this yet, but here's how it would look when it's pressed down, giving you a nice, clean transition. Flooret offers transition pieces in all their different colors of LVP, so you can get a truly seamless look that perfectly matches your flooring. This next piece is called an end cap. It attaches in just the same way as the T-molding, but as you can see here, one side has a finished sidewall. This is great when your flooring finishes against an area that doesn't have a baseboard, like a fireplace, doorway, or in my case here, a sliding door. Starting from one end, I made a mark on the track about every 6 inches, and then drilled some pilot holes all the way through the subfloor. I used these number 6 3/4 inch screws, which were more than enough to securely fasten the track down to the floor. Once you've got that attached down, you'll want to guide the prongs of the transition piece in between the track. You'll hear some clicking noises, indicating that it's getting latched to the track. I then like to step across it to really put some weight into it, and this is what it should sound like. It really is quick to install, and it looks great. One important thing to note is you need to leave a 1 3/8 inch gap between the end of your flooring and the surface that you're going to be transitioning to. This is so you actually have room for the track and transition piece to sit in place. I didn't plan ahead properly here, so if you make the same mistake, follow these steps to cut out a gap. I started with my circular saw and set the blade depth to be low so it wouldn't cut through the subfloor. I cut as far as I could, but I couldn't go all the way because the door trim prevented me from going any further. I used my multi-tool to cut out the remaining sections on either side, and then I could pry out this cut LVP. This really isn't too much extra work, but it does make a mess, and it's just easier if you plan ahead and leave the gap when you're laying the flooring. But now you can just follow the same steps as before, measuring out and drilling your pilot holes, screwing the track into the subfloor, and then attaching the end cap until you hear the satisfying crunch. And I use these end caps in front of all of my exterior doors. And with that, our flooring project was complete. Now we've got this beautiful LVP running the full length of our upstairs. It looks great and it's added so much value to our home. Replacing that old carpet has made such a difference. It wasn't too hard and didn't cost that much either. If you've been wanting to replace your flooring, then I hope this video has given you the confidence to do so. and maybe help you out with some of the trickier parts. I really do recommend exploring Flooret as an option. I honestly think it'd be tough to find a better combination of affordability and quality. It never hurts to get a few samples and check out some of their colors. Remember, you can use the link below and code MAXFLORET to get 50% off your sample order. I hope you enjoyed the video, and be sure to look out for my full baseboard instructional, which I'll be posting soon. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.